Hi, hello! The weapon beta has come and gone, and now we've finally gotten our hands on the new SotO weapons, and wow, I didn't actually expect them to all get unique mechanics when I made that series of videos. And I was even kind of right with some of my predictions, though calling them predictions is kind of generous. Anyway, in general, I think there's a lot of polishing that still needs to be done between now and release. Obviously, we didn't have skill icons in the beta, but there's also a ton of reused animations throughout the weapons and some really awkward design in some places. Not to mention the completely whack balance, but hey, especially that, is what the betas are for. Let things break before they release so that it's in a better state when it actually goes live. Art and animation are also generally some of the last things that get finalized when it comes to stuff like this, so we'll see how things look in, well, a bit under 3 months. So today, I'm going to be talking you through the new weapon mechanics, the skills, potential builds, and the state of balance in the beta. Kind of looking at all of these things from a couple different angles. Mind you, those angles do not include the competitive modes. I will be bringing them up from time to time, and probably more often than you might be used to if you've seen previous videos of mine, but simply based on my own lack of both knowledge and skill in everything that's not PvE based, you don't want me to try and teach you things about that game mode. Cool? Cool. Also, I will split this up across 3 videos as I do so often because, well, I'm just incapable of keeping things short. Yeah, this script is 4.5 pages long. Praise the watch time, I guess. Also, I couldn't find half of these skills on the wiki, but I came prepared and made screenshots of all the skill facts. Almost all of them. I'm gonna link the folder that I have with all these screenshots in the description if you want to look at them by yourself. I tried to get them mostly without any additional stats from gear, so these are like the base numbers, roughly. There's gonna be some things I missed in some places. Oh well. Despite doing that, I don't actually have footage of me playing with the weapons, so you're just gonna have to deal with the old B-roll. Anyway, let's actually get started with Ellie. And this is a long one, because Pistol is fittingly the most complicated out of all of the weapons, probably. If you count every variant of the skill, Weaver technically gets 50 new skills with Pistol, 4 basic auto attacks, 2 variants of the basic 2 and 3 skills that every Ellie spec gets, and then 5 variants of each of the remaining 6 dual attacks. So if you're wondering why there's no offhand pistol, blame Weaver. Its unique mechanics is elemental bullets. Whenever you use a non-auto attack pistol skill while you don't have a matching bullet, you gain a bullet of that element. If you then use a non-auto attacking pistol skill while you do have a matching bullet, then the skill gets an enhanced effect, consuming the bullet in the process, and you don't get another one for consuming a bullet. And these enhancements can be just about anything. Some of them just do more damage, some of them get extra healing, some of them turn your skills AoE, some inflict CC, and some reduce the cooldown. Weaver dual attacks get extra complicated. They have a bonus effect for each applicable bullet, so if you have the Fire-Earth dual attack, there is an enhanced effect for having a fire bullet, for having an earth bullet, or you can get both effects at once if you have both. But you only generate bullets when you consume no bullets during the skill use, and you only get one of them, whatever your current primary attunement is, not 1 bullet for each attunement. You better be taking notes because this will be on the test. The skills themselves seem to be leaning more Condi heavy, as most of the skills, even in water, apply conditions in some capacity. They even made air useful for a condition build, because Air 2's enhanced effect decreases the cooldown of your next pistol skill, and that's any pistol skill, not just air. Things like this make Pistol easily the most complicated Ellie weapon even before you consider dual attacks, adding its own combo system on top of having to manage attunements as you're used to. Another interesting aspect is that there is a decent amount of defensive utility here, mainly in the form of self-healing and barrier, but this isn't a support weapon, these only apply to you. I think this part is most interesting for roaming and skirmisher builds, Pistol doesn't have a lot of cleave, which makes it not great in big group fights, like Zerg's. Going back to PvE, in open world you can of course do anything you want, but with Pistol's complexity and how the utility is often tied to the combo mechanic in addition to its lackluster cleave, I don't really think it's more useful than Scepter just in general. So there it's more something you pick up for fun. But on the other side of PvE, oh boy does it perform well in a benchmark setting. I've got some test benchmarks from the beta for every spec linked in the description, so you can also check these out for yourselves if you want to see how they play. But obviously keep in mind that these are beta numbers, which means that A, they would probably even go a lot higher if people had more than a week's time to practice, and B, these are hopefully going to change by the time we get to release. Anyway, let's talk about the builds. Catalyst is at the bottom here with a 42k benchmark, which is very respectable, but just wait till you hear the other numbers. Catalyst and Pistol don't synergize super well, despite all the projectile finishers. Kata generally wants things to have quickfire CC on them to trigger its traits, and tends to lean a little more power heavy because its utility skills just don't really add that much to Connie builds. So it's not the strongest candidate, though for open world, the quickness axis will be very nice, and the Catalyst Elite does let you do some fun combo gameplay. I can see this taking off as a roaming build or something. Weaver is in the middle with a staggering 46.9k, and the gameplay looks exactly as insane as you think it does. Honestly, I think this could be a lot higher, but creating a rotation for this feels like one of the most complex puzzles in the entire game. This is going to be a balance nightmare because there is no way to simplify this at all, so the gap between people who are good at this build and people who are not good at this build is going to be massive. And then we get to what is probably currently the best pistol user, which is Tempest, which not only has the highest bench, sitting at upwards of 47.5k, it also just has a lot of general synergy. The overload cooldowns in combination with the Transcendent Tempest trait just flow really well into one another, and this is also the only version of the build that at least has some amount of grace for when you make mistakes. For now, this seems like it's going to be the definitive version of Pistol Ellie. It's also probably the best open world version. Between the grace and the access to alacrity, which is amazing for the combo system, it just synergizes really nicely. It also doesn't leave you stranded with no damage if you want to do something like go into water for defensive tools, because your 2 still does quite a bit of damage, unlike something like Scepter. So yeah, Tempest Pistol is going to be pretty good. In general, I'm quite happy with the Ellie pistol. It's unique, it's fitting, it comes with multiple levels of difficulty from the specs, offering much more complex gameplay that a lot of people look to Ellie for, while still having at least some level of meaningful trade-off with Scepter through its generally worse cleave and lower power damage. But as I said, it's really a balance nightmare, and getting these numbers into a healthy place, let alone defining what a healthy place is gonna be quite the task. Next up is Mesmer, and this one's a lot simpler. Rifle is plain and simple a heal support weapon. Notably, it's not an ally targeting weapon this time. Its effects either apply in a radius around the enemy targeted, such as the healing from the auto attack or the 2, or they are ground target effects like the 3 and the 5. The 1, 2, and 5 are all healing and or barrier skills, the 4 is still a phantasm, but mostly here to do CC, and the 3 is full fury uptime on its own, as well as some amount of might, which should hopefully be enough for full uptime in combination with Bountiful Disillusionment. Its damage is basically not worth talking about. People have tried benching this with power builds, and it's bad, and it's probably going to stay bad forever because that's intentional. There's also kind of a secondary mechanic on this weapon, if you want to call it that. The 3 and the 5 also have flip over variants. If you recast the 3, it doesn't apply the boons, but instead does a big burst heal, and also applies cripple and blind. The 5 still gives barrier on cast, but it can be reactivated to create a one-time use portal in exchange for having a longer cooldown on the skill. Both of these flipovers are mostly competitive skills. The big burst heal is nice and something that Mesmer traditionally struggles with, but it's really not worth using unless it's a major emergency, or you know you have a partner that is covering Might and Fury uptime for you. Which, in fairness, is not super uncommon, and obviously I don't think anyone is going to complain about extra versatility on this skill. Meanwhile, the 5 is just 1-to-1 the Fresh Lantern from League of Legends, down to the fact that it gives you a shield on impact, and that no one's ever going to take the portal when they really need to, unless you're actively yelling at them in voice chat. This does enable some very funny meme strats in specific PvE encounters, but it's clearly meant for PvP. I think Rifle does strike a good balance of tools that are relevant in all game modes, and does an excellent job at filling the holes that current heal Mesmer builds have, with more reliable Fury, Might, and some reliable healing that isn't dependent on any resource management or long cast times. There is some discussion right now if Heal Mesmer might actually be better off without it, because Rifle generates fewer clones than other options, especially if you have to save the Phantasm for CC, but I genuinely don't think there's any reason not to use it when it releases. Heal Chrono is basically already pretty decent now after the previous patch, though it is going to take a while for everything to be documented properly. But I think the additional reliability, ease of use, and cohesion that the Rifle offers is what is required to make that build see consistent play in the future. At which point you do have pretty much all the tools you need to succeed to be a really good healer, honestly regardless of what game mode. This will also entirely kill the viability of Heal Mirage, and I for one welcome having one fewer nonsensical niche support build to argue over. For those sane enough to not have to know this, variants of Heal Chrono have been around for ages, and they have always been extremely niche. And then eventually somebody theory crafted a Heal Mirage build that uses staff and a whole bunch of regen tools. The benefit it offered over Heal Chrono was that it did reliable Fury and Might, which is something that Chrono couldn't really do for the longest time. But now Rifle entirely takes care of that, and you have to jump through way fewer hoops than what you ever had to do with Mirage. Chrono is the healing spec now, end of discussion. Though I do think some hybrid builds on other specs might see success in competitive game modes at some point. Honestly, World vs. World is basically the Wild West to me. I think anything can happen there. I'm the wrong person to ask. And that brings us to the last, and maybe honestly the least, and that's in Necro. So the Necro dual swords are medium-range power weapons, which, considering Axe exists, does kind of track weirdly, that play very heavily around their special mechanic, which is that all of their skills, except the auto attack, have flip-over versions that require you to sacrifice health for an additional effect, generally either doing more damage or just kinda using the skill again. Additionally, they all heal you or have lifesteal on them to offset the amount of life you're paying. And there is a lot of problems with this design. But before I get into that, here's the obvious complaint. The skills are really undertuned. People have tried doing benchmarks with them, and they were just universally worse than just camping Greatsword. So you'd be sacrificing a whole bunch of health for literally no benefit. Numbers are a problem that can be fixed fairly easily, but I think there are some underlying design flaws with this weapon that are nowhere near as easy to address. The whole thing is obviously inspired by Guild Wars 1's Necromancer skills, where you had plenty that had health as an additional cost, to the point that it kind of became part of the class's identity. This is something that has only been marginally tapped into by Guild Wars 2 through corruptions and the Signet of Undeath skill. So a weapon with a health cost seems like a pretty natural fit for Necro. Well, there's a couple problems here, and it boils down to the fact that you should never create something with a gimmick that only exists for the sake of having a gimmick. That's bad design, and unfortunately it's exactly what swords do. Let me explain. In Guild Wars 1, the health cost was a counterbalancing measure that was added to skills that let you do something unique or otherwise special, like Blood is Power giving energy regen to other people, something that nothing else can really do, or Order of Undeath adding on-hit damage to minions, which is a very powerful thing that, again, basically nothing else at the time could do. It was a thematic way to set special Necro skills apart from Mesmer and Elementalist, which had their own separate balancing mechanics, so it served both a thematic and a gameplay design purpose. And you also kind of see this with Signet of Undeath, which is one of the only skills in the game that is a full res without taking up the elite skill, which is quite unique. The other thing that makes skill downsides work is if they have additional synergies within a kit that turn the downside into a secret upside. Something you can see very easily with Guild Wars 2's corruptions, which inflict conditions on yourself, which you can then benefit from by using Necromancer's near-exclusive ability to transfer conditions from themselves to enemies, which is in itself a useful ability to have, but normally it's very conditional on what you're fighting. Using corruptions unlocks the ability to use those skills as a self-sustaining part of your build. So what special thing does Sword let you do? Nothing. All their effects are simply damage-based, with the only unusual thing being the self-healing, which is only relevant because you sacrificed the health in the first place, and not even unique because if you use Dagger Warhorn instead, that already gives you a whole bunch of self-sustain without having to take the extra steps. There are no skills or traits that benefit from you sacrificing health or trigger from being healed. You are simply jumping through hoops to get the same results that you would get from another weapon without any unique benefit for the extra effort. In their current state, the only benefit they can give swords to make them worth using is making their damage higher than other options, which is not a healthy design space to be in. They are giving you a downside and a way to play around the downside that's only there for the sake of being there in the first place. And that is not good design. The competitive modes offer a little bit more of an interesting look at swords, because all of this health healing should scale with healing power, which does add a potentially unique angle to buildcraft that can potentially be very interesting. I despise saying something can only work in one of the game modes, because ANET has shown time and time again that PvP exclusive is not really real, or at least not something they want to be a permanent thing, but in its current iteration is the only place that actually offers meaningful design space for the swords to exist in. And I don't know how to fix this for PvE unless we are also reworking some traits to synergize with this, or we just start over from the ground up with swords. Now, stepping back from the design angle a bit, assuming that they do buff the damage, Reaper is the only build variant worth talking about. The Scourge is obviously condition-based, so that's out, and while Harbinger has some untapped power-based options, the existence of Reaper does mandate that the swords alone can't be allowed to massively upgrade above existing options. So they won't suddenly bring Power Harbinger together, because not only do they not have any special synergy, they have direct anti-synergy by doubling down on the fact that both of these things now lose you health. So you're just going to die if you play Harbinger with swords. Reaper, on the other hand, actually does have at least a tiny amount of synergy through the Soul Eater trait, which does offset the health loss even more. With the Rite of State of Balance, this could combine to give you an amount of self-healing on swords that does actually outpace the health you pay, making them an option for something that gives you loads and loads of sustain while giving up less of your damage than you would for using, for example, a dagger. Which, again, considering that this has to compete with just using a greatsword with the Soul Eater trait, is a really hard sell, and once New Toy Syndrome wears off, is not gonna leave them in a good place. But I'm already grasping at straws here to find some sort of niche for swords to occupy, okay? So I guess that's one. Anyway, that's it for the light armor classes. I'll be doing the medium and the heavy ones in the near future, so if you want to see that, you can stick around by, subscribing. Maybe leaving a like, it's always appreciated. And yeah, till then, goodbye.